The boarding call echoed through Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, a promise of sunshine and grandparents for 10-year-old twins Maya and Jordan. They were seasoned flyers, clutching their special unaccompanied minor lanyards like badges of honor. But as they approached the gate for their flight to Orlando, a single woman stood between them and their vacation. Her name was Brenda, and her smile was as thin and cold as the plexiglass barrier beside her. They were about to learn that airline policies can be twisted into weapons, and that sometimes the rules only seem to apply to certain people. They had no idea their father, the man they had just said goodbye to upstairs, was about to turn Gate B32 into the epicenter of the biggest crisis of that agent's career. The air in Concourse B of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with a unique, chaotic energy. It was a river of humanity, a flowing current of rolling suitcases, anxious glances at departure boards, and the muffled symphony of 1,000 simultaneous conversations. For 10-year-old twins Maya and Jordan, it was just another Tuesday. They'd been flying the ATL to MCO route to see their grandparents since they were 6, and they knew the dance by heart. Maya, the elder by a whole 7 minutes, had an air of self-appointed leadership. Her braids were pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense ponytail, and she held their boarding passes and passports in a crisp manila folder. Jordan, quieter and more observant, clutched the strap of his backpack, which was adorned with a keychain of the Millennium Falcon. They both wore the bright red lanyard of Apex Air's Young Wings program, a clear and unmissable signifier that they were traveling as unaccompanied minors. Their father, David, had just left them a few minutes prior, after walking them through security and making sure they were settled near their gate, B32. He'd knelt down, his expensive suit jacket crinkling, and looked them both in the eye. "Okay, team," he'd said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "You know the drill. Be polite, listen to the flight attendants, and call me the second you land. Grandma and Grandpa will be right there waiting. Got it?" "Got it, Dad," Maya had said, puffing out her chest slightly. "Love you, Daddy," Jordan had whispered, giving his father a fierce hug. David had hugged them both tightly, the scent of his cologne, a mix of cedar and clean linen, a familiar comfort. He'd given them one last smile, a flash of brilliant white teeth against his dark skin, before turning and disappearing back toward the main terminal for his own meeting. Now, sitting in the slightly worn-out blue seats facing the gate, Maya felt a thrill of independence. They were on their own, a team. They watched the gate agent, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda, as she typed furiously at her computer. She moved with a sharp, almost brittle efficiency, her lips pressed into a permanent thin line. She'd already snapped at a man who asked if the flight was on time. "The board will be updated when it's updated, sir," and had given a withering look to a young couple struggling to fold a stroller. Then the announcement came, cutting through the din. "Good afternoon, passengers. We are now ready to begin the boarding process for Apex Air Flight 2146 with service to Orlando. At this time, we would like to invite our active-duty military personnel, passengers requiring special assistance, and families with young children to begin pre-boarding through the blue lane." Maya's eyes lit up. "That's us, Jordy," she whispered, nudging her brother. Families with young children. It had always been this way. The gate agents would see their lanyards, see that they were in fact children, and wave them through with a smile. It allowed them to get settled before the rush, a small, sensible courtesy. Confidently, Maya stood up, smoothed down her jeans, and grabbed Jordan's hand. They walked toward the blue boarding lane, their sneakers squeaking softly on the polished linoleum. They were the first to arrive, their bright red lanyards practically glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. Brenda looked up from her screen, her eyes scanning over them with a flat, dismissive glance before flicking to the empty space behind them. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "Hi," Maya said brightly, holding up their boarding passes. "We're here for pre-boarding." Brenda didn't even look at the passes. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Pre-boarding is for families with young children." "We are young children," Maya stated, a hint of confusion in her voice. She pointed to her brother, then herself. "We're 10. Brenda offered a tight, artificial smile. "The policy is for families," she repeated, emphasizing the word as if Maya hadn't understood it the first time. "That means a parent or guardian traveling with their children. Are your parents here?" "Our dad just dropped us off," Jordan piped up softly. "We're flying by ourselves. We have the lanyards." He held his up, a silent plea. Brenda's gaze hardened. "I see the lanyards. That has its own procedure. You'll be handed off to the flight crew at the end of general boarding. For now, you need to wait for your zone to be called. Please step out of the line." She gestured dismissively with her pen, a flick of the wrist that felt like a slap. The casual cruelty of it stunned them into silence. Maya's confident posture deflated. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on them now, a mix of pity and impatience. Her cheeks burned with a hot, creeping shame. "But we always board now," Maya insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "It's easier for us to get our bags in the overhead bin before everyone else gets on." It was a logical, practical point. Brenda's patience, already a finite resource, snapped. "I have been a gate agent for 15 years, she said, her voice dropping to a low, condescending tone that was somehow louder than a shout. "I know the policies of this airline better than a 10-year-old. The courtesy is for parents who need extra time to get their kids settled, not for unaccompanied children to get on the plane early. Now, I will not ask you again. Please step aside and wait for your zone." Her words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Jordan's eyes welled up with tears, and he hid behind his sister, his face pressed into her shoulder. Maya stood her ground for a second longer, her small body rigid with a sense of profound injustice. She stared at Brenda, memorizing the woman's face, the smug set of her jaw, the coldness in her blue eyes. Then, defeated, she took Jordan's hand and led him back to their seats, their walk of shame 100 times longer than their hopeful walk to the gate. They sank into the chairs, the vibrant promise of their adventure now coated in a thick gray film of humiliation. The line for pre-boarding began to fill. A young couple with a baby in a carrier, a father wrangling a toddler, a mother with 2 small boys in tow. They all shuffled past, offering Maya and Jordan fleeting, sympathetic glances. The twins sat huddled together, a small island of misery in the bustling concourse. Jordan was trying to stifle his sobs, his shoulders shaking silently. Maya wrapped an arm around him, her own eyes glassy with unshed tears of frustration. It wasn't just about getting on the plane early. It was about being singled out, being made to feel small and wrong for reasons they couldn't comprehend. "Why was she so mean, Maya?" Jordan whispered, his voice thick. "I don't know," Maya whispered back, her voice fierce. "She's just a mean person." But even as she said it, a deeper, uglier question began to form in her young mind. She'd noticed the way Brenda had smiled, a genuine, if brief smile, at a white family with a child of a similar age. But for them, there was only a cold wall of rules. As Zone 1 was called, a woman who had been sitting across from them stood up. She was a young professional, maybe in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a sharp business suit. She had watched the entire exchange. Before getting in line, she walked over to the twins. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling down to their level. "I'm Sarah. I saw what happened. That was not okay." Maya just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "That gate agent is wrong," Sarah continued, her voice firm. "The policy is absolutely intended to help all young travelers get settled. What she did was a gross misinterpretation, and frankly, it was discriminatory." The word hung in the air, discriminatory. Maya didn't know the legal definition, but she understood the feeling. Sarah gave them a reassuring smile. "Don't you worry, I'm going to say something when I get up there." She walked to the gate, scanned her own boarding pass, and then paused, turning to Brenda. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her tone polite but firm. "I just wanted to register a complaint about how you just treated those 2 children." Brenda's eyes went flat. "Ma'am, if you have a complaint, you can file it on the Apex Air website." "I'll be doing that, believe me," Sarah said, not backing down. "But I also want you to know as a witness that your refusal to let them pre-board was completely out of line. They are children traveling alone. They are the definition of passengers who could use extra time and assistance. Your behavior was unprofessional and deeply unkind." A few other passengers in line murmured in agreement. The man Brenda had snapped at earlier nodded his head emphatically. The gate agent's face, which had been a mask of bored authority, began to flush with angry, blotchy red patches. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her voice dangerously low, "I am the agent in charge of this flight. I am following procedure. Those children will board with their assigned zone, and they will be escorted onto the aircraft by me personally at the appropriate time. Now, if you don't want to miss your flight, I suggest you get on the plane." It was a threat, veiled in customer service jargon. Sarah held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent battle of wills playing out over the scanner. Finally, knowing she couldn't win, she shook her head in disgust and walked down the jet bridge. Brenda watched her go, a smirk of triumph playing on her lips. She had faced down a challenge and won. She was in control. She turned her attention back to the monitor, pointedly ignoring the two small children she had just publicly shamed. She was the queen of Gate B32, and her reign was absolute. The boarding process continued, a steady stream of people filing past. Zone 2, Zone 3. The twins' zone was 4. Each announcement felt like another turn of the screw. They watched as the plane filled, knowing their seats were probably the last two in the very back, and that they would have to awkwardly ask people to stand up, all while trying to hoist their bags into the already crammed overhead bins. The simple, exciting trip had become a gauntlet of anxiety. Maya finally pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking. Her dad had told her to only call when she landed, but this felt different. This felt like something he needed to know. She found his contact and hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. What could he do? He was already gone. It would just make him worry. With a sigh, she put the phone away. They would just have to endure it. They were a team. They could handle one mean gate agent. But the seed of doubt had been planted. This wasn't just a mean person having a bad day. This was something else. This was a person with a small amount of power using it to hurt them, and it felt personal. It felt targeted, and it was a feeling that 10-year-old Maya and Jordan were just beginning to understand. David Harrison glanced at his watch. His meeting in the Concourse T Apex Sky Club had run shorter than expected. The quarterly revenue projections were strong, and the mood among the regional managers had been buoyant. He'd shaken hands, shared a laugh, and now had a precious, unexpected 45 minutes before his own flight to Chicago for a conference. His first instinct was to grab a coffee and catch up on emails, but a different thought nudged at him, a familiar paternal pull. The kids. Their flight to Orlando didn't depart for another 20 minutes. He could swing by Gate B32, give them one last wave through the window, see them off. It was a small thing, but these small things were the bedrock of his relationship with his children, a constant reassurance that, even with his demanding job, they were his absolute priority. He navigated the airport with the ease of a man who spent half his life in them. He walked at a brisk, purposeful pace, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the floor. As he rounded the corner into the main walkway of Concourse B, he could see the crowd clustered around B32. Apex Flight 2146 to Orlando. He smiled to himself. Maya was probably organizing their snacks while Jordan was deep in his comic book. But as he drew closer, the smile faded from his face. He saw them. They weren't sitting near the window, excitedly watching the ground crew. They were huddled in their seats far from the gate, and even from this distance he could see the distress in their posture. Jordan's head was buried in his sister's lap, and Maya was staring straight ahead, her jaw set in a way he recognized. It was her "I'm trying not to cry" face. A cold dread washed over him, instantly eclipsing the warmth of the successful meeting. He quickened his pace, his long strides eating up the distance. The ambient noise of the airport seemed to fade into a dull roar. His focus narrowed to his 2 children. "Maya, Jordan," he said, his voice low and urgent as he reached them. Their heads snapped up. The relief that flooded their faces was immediately followed by a fresh wave of tears. Jordan launched himself into his father's arms, burying his face in the fine wool of his suit jacket. "Dad." Hey, what's wrong? What happened?" David asked, his hand stroking Jordan's back as he knelt, his other hand finding Maya's. Her hand was cold. "That lady," Maya choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the gate. "The gate agent. She wouldn't let us pre-board. She yelled at us." David's entire demeanor shifted. The concerned father was still there, but a new layer emerged, something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. He looked toward the gate and saw the woman with the blonde bob, Brenda, who was now officiously checking the pass of another passenger. He held Jordan for a moment longer, letting him get his crying out. He looked at Maya, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of hurt and outrage. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice calm, almost unnervingly so. Maya recounted the entire story, her voice gaining strength as she detailed the injustice. She told him what Brenda had said about the policy, how she'd dismissed their lanyards, how she had shamed them in front of everyone, and how she had shut down the nice woman Sarah, who had tried to help. With every word, the muscle in David's jaw tightened. He wasn't just hearing about a rude employee. He was hearing a clear, actionable description of a policy violation, a failure of customer care, and a potential HR nightmare, all directed at his children. He knew the Apex Air Operations Manual front to back. He had helped write parts of it. The Unaccompanied Minor Program, designated Young Wings, had specific protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of stress. Pre-boarding wasn't just a courtesy, it was a key part of the safety and comfort protocol. He stood up, his 6'2" frame seeming to cast a sudden shadow over the brightly lit area. He gently moved Jordan so he was sitting next to Maya again. "Stay right here," he said, his voice now stripped of all emotion except a quiet, steely resolve. "Don't move. I'm going to handle this." He straightened his tie, smoothed his suit jacket, and began to walk toward Gate B32. He wasn't an angry father anymore. He was David Harrison, Vice President of North American Operations for Apex Air, and Queen Brenda's reign was about to come to a swift and definitive end. The passengers still waiting in the Zone 4 line saw a tall, imposing black man in a power suit approaching the gate, and instinctively moved aside, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The temperature at Gate B32 was about to plummet. Brenda was in her element. The last of the stragglers for Zone 4 were making their way through. She felt a smug satisfaction. She had managed her gate efficiently, enforced the rules, and put that interfering woman in her place. She was just about to make the final boarding call when she saw him approaching. A tall man in a suit that probably cost more than her car payment. He wasn't rushing, but he moved with an unnerving purpose that made the hairs on her arm stand up. She immediately put on her customer service face, a mask of strained pleasantry. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we're on the final call for boarding. If you're on this flight, I need to see your pass immediately," she said, her tone preemptively defensive. The man didn't break stride. He stopped directly in front of her desk, his presence so commanding that it seemed to suck the air out of the immediate vicinity. He wasn't looking at the boarding pass scanner or the jet bridge. He was looking directly at her. His eyes were calm, but held an intensity that she found deeply unsettling. "Are you the gate agent in charge of Flight 2146? He asked. His voice was quiet, but it resonated with an authority that cut through the remaining airport chatter. "I am," Brenda said, lifting her chin. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like your name and your employee ID number, please," he said, his tone still perfectly level. Brenda's defensiveness sharpened into suspicion. "I'm not required to give you that information. Who are you?" "My name is David Harrison," he said, his eyes unwavering. "And you are, in fact, required to provide your name and ID to any passenger who requests it. It's in the Apex Customer Bill of Rights, Section 4, subsection B. But since you seem to be having trouble recalling company policy today, your name tag says Brenda. So, Brenda, I'll ask you again. What is your employee ID number? Brenda's face went pale. He hadn't just named a policy. He'd cited it like a lawyer. The confidence she'd worn like armor began to crack. Who was this man? I don't understand what this is about, she stammered, deciding to play dumb. This is about those two 10-year-old children sitting over there, David said, gesturing slightly with his head toward Maya and Jordan without taking his eyes off her. My children, the ones you refused to allow to pre-board. A flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of pure panic, washed over Brenda's face. The father. This was their father. She had assumed he was long gone. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a defense. Sir, as I explained to the children, the family boarding policy is for parents traveling with— Stop, David said. The single word was not loud, but it had the force of a physical blow. Brenda's explanation died in her throat. Don't tell me what you think the policy is, Brenda. Tell me what the policy is. Quote me the line from the Gate Agent Operations Manual, Chapter 3, Section 7, that states unaccompanied minors are excluded from pre-boarding. Take your time. I'll wait. Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. Of course, she couldn't quote it. No such line existed. She had invented it, a convenient fiction to assert her authority. The man, David Harrison, knew it. He wasn't guessing. He knew. The horrifying realization began to dawn on her. This was not just an angry, well-informed father. I was using my discretion, she finally managed to say, her voice a weak rasp. The cabin was filling up. Discretion? David's voice dropped even lower, becoming dangerously soft. Let's talk about discretion. Let's talk about the Apex Compass, our core value system. You know it? It's on posters in every break room. Safety, care, integrity, and passion. Tell me, Brenda, which of those values were you demonstrating when you humiliated two children in front of a gate full of passengers? Was it care, or perhaps integrity? He was vivisecting her, not with anger, but with the cold, sharp scalpel of her own company's ethos. The few remaining passengers were now frozen, watching the drama unfold with rapt attention. Brenda fumbled for her radio. Mark, I need a supervisor at Gate B32 immediately. That's a good idea, David said with a chilling lack of emotion. I'd like to speak with Mark, too. A moment later, a harried-looking man in a slightly ill-fitting manager's uniform came jogging up. Brenda, what's the— He stopped short when he saw David Harrison. Mark's face lost all its color. Unlike Brenda, he recognized the man instantly. He'd seen him on company-wide town hall webcasts and in corporate communications. It was the David Harrison, the VP. Mr. Harrison, sir, I had no idea you were in the terminal, Mark stammered, his eyes wide with terror. He shot a frantic, questioning look at Brenda, who looked like she was about to faint. Clearly, Mark, David said, his gaze shifting to the supervisor. The full weight of his authority now fell on him. I was seeing my children off, and I came back to find them in tears because your agent Brenda decided to invent a policy to deny them boarding with the other young children. She then proceeded to berate a passenger who attempted to advocate for them. So, before I have this entire gate crew suspended pending a full investigation into their training and conduct, I want you to explain to me how one of your lead agents can be so fundamentally ignorant of the unaccompanied minor protocols. Mark was sweating profusely. Sir, I am so sorry. There's no excuse, Brenda. What were you thinking? Brenda looked desperately at her supervisor, hoping for an ally, but saw only a man frantically trying to distance himself from the explosion she had caused. I thought, she began weakly. No, David interrupted, his voice cutting like glass. You didn't think, you felt. You saw two young black children traveling alone, and you felt you had the power to make them feel small. You wielded a non-existent rule like a weapon, and you did it with a smile. This wasn't a procedural error, Mark. This was a character failure, and it's a liability I will not tolerate on my watch." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Yes, Cynthia, it's David. I'm at Gate B32 in Atlanta. I need you to do two things for me. First, get me the head of HR for the Atlanta hub on the line. Now. Second, I want you to book my children, Maya and Jordan Harrison, and myself, on the next flight to Orlando, first class. My Chicago trip is canceled, and I want this flight Apex 2146 held at the gate. No one is going anywhere until I am finished here." Brenda finally crumpled. The full catastrophic weight of her actions crashed down on her. She hadn't just been rude to a couple of kids. She had done it to the children of one of the most powerful executives in the entire company. She had been caught, not just in a lie, but in an act of petty cruelty that was now being framed as a corporate crisis. As David Harrison began speaking quietly but firmly into his phone about an urgent personnel matter, Brenda stared at the twins, who were watching from their seats, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. In their eyes, she saw not just her downfall, but the reflection of her own profound and irreversible mistake. The conversation David Harrison had on his phone was brief, clinical, and utterly final for Brenda. Mark, the supervisor, stood by, wringing his hands, looking like a man awaiting a verdict on his own fate. When David hung up, he looked at Mark. "Mark, you will escort Brenda to the hub HR office immediately. She is to be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Her system access is to be revoked. She is not to work another gate. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir, crystal clear," Mark said, nodding vigorously. "Brenda," David said, addressing her one last time, his voice devoid of any lingering anger, now just filled with a heavy disappointment. "I hope that during your time off, you reflect on the fact that the trust parents place in our airline is sacred. You violated that trust today. Not just mine, but the trust of every parent who puts their child on one of our planes." Brenda, her face pale and streaked with tears, could only nod mutely. She unclipped her ID badge from her uniform and placed it on the counter. The small piece of plastic, once her symbol of authority, now looked like a tombstone for her career. Mark gently touched her elbow, and together they walked away from the gate, disappearing into the concourse, leaving a void of stunned silence behind them. With the immediate crisis handled, David's entire demeanor softened as he turned and walked back to his children. He knelt before them again, the powerful executive vanishing, replaced once more by the concerned father. "Hey," he said gently, "you two okay?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide. "Dad, you're the vice president." It came out as a whisper of disbelief. David managed a small smile. "That's my day job. My main job is being your dad, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you. No one should ever make you feel that way." "Are we still going to see Grandma?" Jordan asked, his voice small. "You bet we are," David said, pulling them both into a hug. "In fact, the plans have changed a little. I'm coming with you. We're going to have a little extra vacation time together." He personally walked them down the jet bridge, past the line of still waiting passengers, whose curious and sympathetic looks followed them. He spoke quietly to the lead flight attendant at the aircraft door, a woman named Maria. "Maria, I'm David Harrison. These are my children, Maya and Jordan. There was an incident at the gate. I need you to please take extra special care of them. Find them 2 seats in first class and get them anything they want. I'll be joining them in a moment." The flight attendant, having heard the commotion, looked at the twins with deep empathy. "Of course, Mr. Harrison, boys and girls," she said, smiling warmly at Maya and Jordan. "Welcome aboard. Follow me, I have the perfect seats for you right up front." As the twins were led into the sanctuary of the plane, David turned back to the jet bridge, where Mark had reappeared, looking even more terrified than before. "Mr. Harrison, sir, the passengers are getting restless. We're already delayed." "The delay is the least of our problems, Mark," David said, his voice hard again. "This wasn't just about Brenda. This is a systemic failure. The fact that she felt empowered to act that way means her training was deficient, her supervision was lacking, and our culture has a blind spot. I want a full review of the discretionary policy training for all gate agents, hub by hub, starting here in Atlanta. I want a report on my desk by Monday outlining how we are going to ensure this never happens again. Not to my kids, not to anyone's kids. Do you understand what I'm asking for? Yes, sir, Mark said. A complete review. Systemic changes, I understand. Good, David said. He gave one last look at the now empty gate desk, a silent testament to the drama that had unfolded. Then he turned and boarded the plane, leaving Mark to deal with the operational fallout. Inside, he found Maya and Jordan settled into large, comfortable first-class seats, already sipping on orange juice from real glasses. They looked small in the big chairs, but the fear and humiliation in their eyes had been replaced by a dawning sense of security and wonder. The flight to Orlando was smooth. David spent the time talking with them, not about the incident, but about school, about their grandparents, about what rides they wanted to go on first. He was rebuilding their sense of normalcy, plastering over the cracks that Brenda's cruelty had created. But the lesson of the day was not lost on them. They had experienced the sting of prejudice from a person in a position of authority, but they had also witnessed something else, the quiet, immense power of their father. He hadn't shouted or become aggressive. He had used his knowledge, his position, and his unwavering belief in what was right to dismantle the injustice piece by piece. He had shown them that the most effective response to ugly behavior isn't to stoop to its level, but to rise above it with intelligence and integrity. When they landed in the warm Florida sunshine and were swept into the loving arms of their grandparents, the ordeal at Gate B32 felt a world away, but the memory would remain. It was a harsh lesson in how the world can sometimes work, but it was also an unforgettable lesson in how to stand up to it. A lesson taught not with a lecture, but with quiet, decisive action from the man they were proud to call their dad. The immediate storm at Gate B32 had passed, but its impact spread outwards in powerful concentric ripples, touching each person involved and altering the landscape of their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. For Apex Air, it was a near-miss catastrophe. For a family, it was a defining moment. For one employee, it was the end of a chapter. The warm, humid Florida air, fragrant with night-blooming jasmine, was a world away from the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the Atlanta airport. Maya and Jordan were tucked into twin beds in their grandparents' guest room, a familiar space filled with seashell collections and old photo albums. Their grandfather had made them root beer floats, and their grandmother had enveloped them in hugs that smelled of cinnamon and love. They were safe. But the events of the day lingered just beneath the surface. The lights were out, and the only sound was the gentle whir of the ceiling fan. "Maya," Jordan's voice was a small whisper in the dark. "Yeah?" Was Dad angry at us? Maya turned onto her side to face her brother's shadowy form. "No, Jordy, why would you think that? He wasn't angry at us at all. He was angry at Brenda." "He was different," Jordan said, searching for the right word. When he walked to the desk, he looked like the principal when kids get in big trouble, all quiet and scary. Maya thought about that. He was right. She had never seen her father like that. She'd seen him happy, sad, tired, and stressed from work, but she had never seen that cold, controlled fire. It was the look of a king who had discovered a poisoner in his court. "That wasn't Principal Scary," Maya corrected, her voice full of a newfound authority. "That was a superpower. She was a bad guy and he just beat her, without even yelling." She paused, processing the thought. He used his words and company rules. It was like a secret weapon she didn't know he had. "So his job is his superpower?" Jordan asked, the idea beginning to take root in his 10-year-old imagination. "I think so," Maya said. "He built that whole airline maybe, so he knows all the secret codes." She fell silent for a moment, the initial thrill of her father's victory giving way to the memory of what came before it. "I hated how she looked at us, Jordy, like we were bugs, like we didn't belong there." "The other kids got to go on," Jordan whispered, the hurt still fresh. "The ones with their moms and dads. Because she was a bully, Maya stated, the word tasting sour and true. And she thought we were easy targets because we were alone. She thought nobody would stand up for us. She sat up in bed, the moonlight from the window catching the determined look on her face. But she was wrong. Dad was there. What if he wasn't? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and unwelcome. What if David Harrison had gone straight to his meeting in Chicago? What if he hadn't had that paternal urge to see them off one last time? They would have endured the shame, struggled with their bags, and carried the quiet wound of the experience with them. Then we would have told him when we landed, Maya said, her voice fiercely loyal. And he would have found her anyway. Bad guys don't get away with it. Not from Dad. Jordan seemed satisfied with this answer. It restored a sense of order to his world. He rolled over, and soon his breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep. But Maya lay awake long after, staring at the spinning blades of the fan. She understood now that the world had invisible rules and visible ones. Brenda had tried to use the invisible rules of prejudice against them, but her father had countered with the visible, written-down rules of the company. It was a complex and unsettling lesson. She felt an immense pride in her father, but also a new, sharp awareness of the world's quiet dangers. She was no longer just a kid on a fun trip. She was a witness. While his children slept, David Harrison stood on the balcony of the last-minute hotel suite he'd booked near the theme parks. He had loosened his tie and taken off his jacket, but the tension from the day was still coiled in his shoulders. He held his phone to his ear, listening to the voice of his wife, Lena. "And then what did you do?" Lena's voice was a balm, but he could hear the steel underneath it, the protective fury of a mother. "I did what I had to do, Lena," David said, his voice low. He recounted the final details, escorting Brenda away, the conversation with Mark, the flight. "I tried to stay professional, in front of the kids, in front of the staff. But when I saw Maya's face, that look of defiance trying to cover up how hurt she was, I wanted to tear that entire gate apart." "I'm glad you didn't," Lena said softly. "You did something more effective. You tore her career apart, and you did it the right way. David, you have to tell me. Do you think it was because they were—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. David closed his eyes, the image of his two small children being shamed searing itself into his memory. "Yes," he said, the word heavy with a weary certainty. "I have no doubt. Brenda saw two well-dressed, confident black kids traveling on their own, and her bias kicked in. Maybe she thought their tickets were bought with miles she didn't think they deserved. Maybe she resented their independence. It doesn't matter. It manifested as an abuse of power, the kind of microaggression that people like us deal with all the time. Only this time, it happened to our babies." He could hear Lena take a sharp breath. "I'm booking the first flight to Orlando tomorrow morning." "I know," he said. "I figured you would. The kids are okay, truly. They're resilient, and right now, I think they're more in awe of their dad, the superhero VP, than they are traumatized." A wry, tired smile touched his lips. "But this can't be just a story we tell. This has to be a catalyst." "What are you going to do?" "I've already started," David said, his voice shifting back into the focused tone of the executive. "Mark is doing a full review of the Atlanta hub, but I'm taking it national. I'm scheduling an emergency meeting with the heads of in-flight services, airport operations, and human resources. We're going to build a new training module, the Young Wings Protocol, beyond the manual. It's going to feature scenario-based training on unconscious bias. We'll use this incident, anonymized of course, as the core case study." He was turning his personal rage into corporate policy, forging his pain into a shield to protect other children. It was the only way he knew how to process it. "Just be there for them, David," Lena said, her voice softening. "For the next few days, forget you're a VP. Just be Dad. The guy who takes them on the teacups until they're dizzy. We'll deal with the corporate fallout later." "Deal," he said, a genuine sense of relief washing over him. I love you. I love you more. Now go get some rest. Your superhero duties are done for the day." He hung up the phone and looked out at the distant, glittering lights of the Magic Kingdom. His children were safe. His wife was on her way. But he knew this was just the beginning. He had put out a fire, but now he had to fireproof the entire forest. Brenda sat in a sterile, windowless room across a polished table from a woman named Miss Albright, the hub's senior HR manager. Miss Albright had a calm, unreadable face and a stack of papers in front of her. Mark had left Brenda here an hour ago, and the silence had been deafening. "Brenda," Miss Albright began, her voice neutral, "we have reviewed the preliminary report from your supervisor, Mark, and a direct account from Vice President Harrison. We have also pulled the security footage from Gate B32. Brenda flinched. The footage. It would show everything. Her dismissive wave, the twins' crushed faces, her confrontation with the passenger Sarah, her smug look of triumph. Based on these findings, Miss Albright continued as if reading a weather report, you have been found to be in gross violation of multiple company policies. These include, but are not limited to, failure to follow unaccompanied minor protocols, misrepresentation of company policy to passengers, and conduct unbecoming of an Apex Air employee, which directly contradicts our core values of care and integrity. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself. It was a misunderstanding. I was stressed. The flight was full. Miss Albright held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced Brenda completely. Brenda, you have been with us for 15 years. In that time, you have had 3 passenger complaints filed against you for rude and dismissive behavior, 2 of which resulted in formal warnings. This incident today was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a pattern of behavior culminating in an egregious act of poor judgment and, frankly, discrimination, directed at the children of a senior executive. The potential legal and brand damage is incalculable. The word hung in the air. Discrimination. It sounded so official, so much worse than just being mean. As such, Miss Albright said, sliding a single piece of paper across the table, your employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective immediately. This is your final notice. Security will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings, and then they will escort you from the premises. 15 years, gone in 15 minutes, all because of 2 kids. That's what she wanted to think. But as she looked at Miss Albright's impassive face, a deeper, more painful truth began to surface. It wasn't because of the kids. It was because of her bitterness, her resentment, the little knots of prejudice she'd allowed to harden inside her over the years. She had seen a target, and she had taken a shot, never imagining the target could shoot back with such devastating force. She signed the paper, her hand trembling. The career she had built, the small kingdom of the gate she had ruled, had vanished. She was no longer Queen Brenda of Gate B32. She was just Brenda, unemployed. And as she was led out of the office by 2 silent security guards, she felt the crushing weight of a consequence she had never believed would come for her. A year can seem like a lifetime, especially when measured in corporate change and the emotional growth of children. The dramatic confrontation at Gate B32 was no longer a raw wound, but a scar that told a story. For the Harrison family and for Apex Air, it had become a foundational narrative, a tale of failure, accountability, and the slow, difficult work of building something better from the ashes of a mistake. The room was bright, modern, and filled with the nervous energy of 24 new hires. This was the pinnacle of their training, the final module before they received their own ID badges and were sent out to the gates. The man standing before them was Mark, the former supervisor of Gate B32. He was no longer harried and terrified. He stood with a calm, earned confidence, his new title displayed on the screen behind him. Lead Facilitator, Compassionate Care Program. He had not been fired. In the chaotic aftermath, David Harrison had seen something in Mark's panic, a desperate desire to do the right thing, buried under years of corporate inertia. David had given him a choice: find a new job or help lead the change. Mark chose the latter, pouring himself into the task with the zeal of a convert. "Good morning, everyone," Mark began, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "Welcome to the Young Wings Protocol. Some of you might think this is just about process, how to check in an unaccompanied minor, who to hand them off to. It's not. This module is about empathy. It's about understanding the immense trust a parent places in you, in our airline when they put their child on one of our planes." He clicked a button and a new slide appeared. It was titled, Case Study, ATL MCO 2146. There were no names, no dates, just a simple, anonymized summary of events. 2 siblings, age 10, traveling as designated UMs, are denied pre-boarding access by a gate agent. The agent enforces a policy that does not exist, causing public humiliation and emotional distress. The intervention of another passenger is dismissed. The situation escalates upon the arrival of the children's guardian. Mark let the words hang in the air. "This happened," he said, his voice dropping. "Right here in this airport. The agent in this scenario, a 15-year veteran, was terminated. But her firing didn't solve the root problem. The problem was a culture that allowed discretion to be used as a weapon, a culture where an employee could feel empowered to make a passenger, especially a child, feel small, unwelcome, and less than." He saw the recruits shifting uncomfortably. This was not the standard, cheerful customer service training they were expecting. Our Vice President of North American Operations, who was the guardian in this story, has mandated that this case study be the cornerstone of our training. He believes, and I believe, that we learn more from our failures than our successes. Your job is not just to scan boarding passes, it's to be a guardian. It's to be the person a scared child can trust. It's to see a bright red lanyard and think precious cargo, not inconvenience. Today we're going to break down this incident, moment by moment, and you are going to tell me what you would have done differently. From the back of the room, standing in the shadows of the doorway, David Harrison watched. He had made it a point to quietly observe one of these sessions every quarter. He listened as Mark, a man he had once terrified, now passionately and effectively taught the very lesson born from that awful day. He saw the new recruits engaging, debating, their faces showing a dawning understanding. This was the ripple effect he had hoped for. This was the fireproof forest. He gave Mark a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval and slipped out before anyone noticed he was there. Maya, now a mature 11 and a half, sat at the dining room table, surrounded by poster board and colored markers. She was meticulously lettering the title of her social studies project, The Power of One, How Bystanders Can Change the Story. The incident at the airport had unlocked something in her. She had become fiercely observant, with a profound sense of justice. She was the first to defend a classmate being teased on the playground, the one who organized a petition to get more recycling bins in the cafeteria. The memory of her own powerlessness had fueled a desire to empower others. Jordan, whose artistic talent had blossomed, sat beside her, carefully drawing a series of panels for her presentation. One panel showed a large, imposing figure standing in front of 2 small children, blocking their path. The next panel showed another figure stepping forward from a crowd, a hand outstretched to help. "Make the mean lady a little more witchy," Maya instructed, peering over his shoulder. "I'm trying," Jordan said, concentrating, "but I want her to look like a real person. Dad said the scariest thing was that she wasn't a monster. She was just a regular person making a bad choice." That had been one of the many conversations they'd had with their parents over the past year. They didn't shy away from it. They discussed it, dissected it, and learned from it. The trauma had been processed into a lesson in character and ethics. Their mother, Lena, walked in, sorting through the mail. Bills, junk, a magazine. "Oh, what's this?" "Maya and Jordan Harrison." She handed them a thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address was from a law firm in Chicago. Curious, Maya carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, written on elegant stationery in a flowing, handwritten script. Dear Maya and Jordan, you don't know me, but my name is Sarah Connolly. We met briefly a year ago at a gate at the Atlanta airport. I was the woman who tried to speak to the gate agent for you. I have thought about you both often since that day. I'm writing because I recently read an airline industry journal article about a new, award-winning training program at Apex Air, focused on empathy and care for young travelers. The article described an anonymous incident that prompted the change, and I knew in my heart it was your story. I wanted to tell you something I didn't get to say that day. I was so incredibly proud of you, of your bravery, your politeness in the face of such rudeness, and the way you stood up for yourselves. But more than that, I was inspired. Witnessing what happened, and then seeing the quiet, decisive way your father handled it was a profound lesson for me. That day, I was just a passenger. Today, I lead the pro bono division at my law firm, focusing on advocacy for children's rights. Your story, in a small but significant way, helped push me down that path. It reminded me that you don't need a title or a position to stand up for what's right, but when you do have power, you have a deep responsibility to use it for good. Thank you for being brave. You changed more than just an airline policy that day. Sincerely, Sarah Connolly. Maya read the letter aloud, her voice thick with emotion. When she finished, she looked at Jordan, whose eyes were wide with wonder. A stranger had not only remembered them, but had carried their story with her and turned it into something good. The woman from the crowd, the one who had tried to help, was now a hero in her own story. That evening, they showed the letter to their father. David read it slowly, then read it again. He looked at his children, their faces glowing with a pride that was no longer just about their dad's power, but about their own impact. The incident had caused them pain, but it had also shown them their own resilience. It had shown them that a single moment of injustice could spark 1,000 moments of positive change. In a company, in a stranger, and most importantly, in themselves. The letter from Sarah wasn't an ending to the story. It was proof that the story was still being written, its ripples spreading ever outward, carrying a simple, powerful message of care, integrity, and the enduring legacy of doing the right thing. This story is a powerful reminder that prejudice isn't always loud and overt. Sometimes it hides behind a uniform, a name tag, and a twisted interpretation of the rules. What Brenda did wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a decision to use her minor authority to inflict major hurt on 2 children. It's a reflection of a quiet, insidious bias that so many people face every single day in places where they should feel safe. But David Harrison's response shows us that true power isn't about yelling the loudest. It's about quiet strength, deep knowledge, and using your position not for personal revenge, but to enforce justice and enact meaningful change. He didn't just solve his own problem. He set in motion a process to ensure it wouldn't happen to others. If this story of injustice and ultimate accountability moved you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share it with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right matters. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that make you think. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.